This episode is brought to you by Peloton. Break through the busiest time of year with the brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus. Powered by Peloton IQ. With real-time guidance and endless ways to move, you can personalize your workouts and train with confidence, helping you reach your goals in less time. Let yourself run, lift, sculpt, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
Spring is here, and the shopping list is long. Time to make a Lowe's run. Buy 3 bags, get 3 free of Stay Green 1 cubic foot garden soil. Plus, right now, members can earn 4 times the points on an eligible purchase. Start spring off strong with these deals and more. Our best lineup is here at Lowe's. Valid through 3/25 while supplies last. Soil offer excludes Alaska and Hawaii. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. See Lowe's.com/terms for details. Subject to change. Point boosters subject to exclusions and more terms apply. One-time only offer.
When you're a kid, you really have no idea what goes into becoming an adult. I mean, you look at these adults and they just seem perfect or imperfect, but you never really think about how they had a childhood and what they might have been like. And so the True Ugly Duckling, how Hans Christian Andersen became a swan, I want them to go, oh, just a second, wait, the Ugly Duckling story was his story? What does that mean? And then open the book and realize that, wow, he went through some tough things, but even though he did that, he found his way to becoming the swan, his definition of a swan, which is, I think, so beautiful.
Hey everyone, I'm Bianca Schulze, a founder of the Children's Book Review, and this is the Growing Readers Podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with the incredibly talented Sandra Nickel to talk about her breathtaking new picture book biography, The True Ugly Duckling, How Hans Christian Andersen Became a Swan. A story that reimagines the life of Hans Christian Andersen through the very lens he gave the world, the fairy tale. Sandra Nickel is an award-winning author of picture books honored with some of the most prestigious names in children's literature. She is the recipient of a Christopher Award, a 2-time winner of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators Crystal Kite Award, a finalist for the Golden Kite Award for nonfiction for young readers, a Junior Literary Guild Gold Selection honoree, and a Charlotte Huck Award recommended author. Sandra holds an MFA in writing for children and young adults and has presented writing workshops throughout Europe and the United States. In our conversation, Sandra and I explore what it means to feel different, why fairy tale structure can do what straight narratives simply cannot, and how Andersen's neurodivergence was never a flaw to overcome, but the very thing that made him extraordinary. Sandra also shares the personal inspiration behind another picture book, Seven, A Remarkable Pigeon, a story woven from her own daughter's journey. This episode is so full of heart, and I know it will resonate with every reader who has ever felt like they didn't quite fit in. I hope you love this conversation as much as I did, but first, here's the synopsis for The True Ugly Duckling, How Hans Christian Andersen Became a Swan. A picture book biography of one of the most iconic storytellers of all time, Hans Christian Andersen, illustrated by paper-cut artist Calvin Nichols. He brought to life stories and characters that millions have loved. A one-legged tin soldier who yearned for love, a poor little match girl, a mermaid who gave up her voice for a prince. But who was Hans Christian Andersen? He was a strange child, an ugly duckling. Even his mother said so. He didn't seem to think like, or look like, anyone around him. But while his tender heart was bruised by ridicule, it responded by driving an unstoppable urge to create, to entertain. If he couldn't act, he would dance. If he couldn't dance, he would sing. And if he couldn't sing, well, maybe he had stories to tell. With each rejection and defeat, Hans would soothe himself by making art with scissors and whatever was handy. A bit of cloth, a piece of paper, until one day, structured like a fairy tale, this is the story of how Hans Christian Andersen took all the parts of his life, whether painful or transcendent, and used them to create books that have touched children the world over. This is the first picture book biography of Andersen to be told through a lens that takes into account what scholars now know of his neurodiversity. Andersen, for instance, often told stories while keeping his hands busy by making paper-cut art. In this spirit, the remarkable illustrations of Calvin Nichols are all created as paper-cut soft sculptures. A fresh and uniquely beautiful look at one of the world's greatest storytellers. Hi, Sandra. Welcome to the Growing Readers podcast.
Hi, Bianca. It's great to be here.
I am hoping that we can just warm up our conversation with a couple of rapid fire questions. Is that okay with you?
Well, yes, let's try it.
All right. Are you a dog person or a cat person?
I'm a both person. I have both a cat and a dog.
I love it. What kind of dog do you have?
An Australian Shepherd.
Me too. Mine's a mini though.
Oh, yeah, mine's a mini too. Oh, that's fantastic.
What colors is yours?
So mine's a like a, black, beige, white.
Me too.
That's perfect. What's yours name?
Poppy, like the flower.
Oh, okay. Ours is Haley because she was born in an H year.
I love it. I love it. All right. Next rapid fire question. The last thing that made you stop and stare.
Oh, my goodness. I can't think of anything.
This question just made you stop and stare.
This question made me stop and stare.
I love it. All right. Silence or music while you write?
Oh, complete silence.
Yeah. If I have music while I'm writing, it has to be wordless, like no lyrics.
Yeah. Maybe I can do that. No, because my brain just always goes to music. So if I have music on, I'm not getting any writing done.
Do you prefer a happy ending or a bittersweet ending to a story?
Happy.
And if you had to pick just one, would you pick fairy tales or biographies?
Fairy tales.
And do you have a favorite fairy tale from your childhood?
So I think actually, all of Hans Christian Andersen's, a lot of them, even though some of them are pretty scary. Maybe The Princess and the Pea, there was that great hope that you would be the great different one and have that happy ending.
Yeah, I think it was The Princess and the Pea for me too. Although I always felt sorely disappointed that I couldn't possibly be the princess because I could sleep through everything.
Well, you never know. Did you ever try a pea?
Yeah, I didn't like peas as a kid, so I probably never even thought to try it.
You might have woken up all black and blue and realized it's me.
Exactly. All right, well, longer responses now. And to be a writer, they say that you need to be a reader first. So was there a pivotal moment in which you considered yourself a reader?
Well, I think, I was always a reader. That was my lifeline. I read all the time. When I went and got my MFA, I learned how to be a writer who reads. And the writer who reads isn't just enjoying the book or losing themselves in the book. There's this little Sandra constantly here that when I'm writing, I'm like, oh, that's how they did that. Oh, what a great way to do that. Oh, let me stop and write and make a note on this. And actually, I did this with movies also. And I still do it with my movies. And it drives my daughter insane because I'll be like, do you see what they just did there? Do you see how they did that? And so it's a different way to be a reader.
Yeah. Well, on that note, the question I had before was like, what was the last moment that made you stop and stare? And now I'm going to put you on the spot again. What was the last book or movie that you were either reading or watching where you did have that moment of like, oh, yes, that's how they did it. That's so clever.
That's
Can you
how
think
they
of one?
did it. I recently read Kate Hosford's You and I Are Stars in the Sky. Is that? Oh no, she's one of my good friends. I hope I'm not butchering the title. It's an I love you book. And she has such a great facility for finding new ways to make the love between a parent and a child come out. And I just loved reading that. I thought she had such fresh ways of bringing out that emotion in us.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a beautiful book. And I do believe you said the title correctly. And I should also know because I just interviewed her with a written interview on the Children's Book Review. But I think you were really close with the title. But yeah, that's a beautiful book.
Yeah.
Well, is it true that after you received your MFA, that you drove so hard toward finishing a middle grade that the joy of writing disappeared and you stopped for over a year?
Yes, it's true. It's so true. There's something about novel writing that can become all consuming. And I just wanted to finish it and I wanted to happen. And I was getting irritated with my family and I was cross all the time. And at one point I just like stopped and said, no, wait, this is not why I'm writing. I am writing because books have always been joy for me and expansion and learning and getting lost. And this isn't what the story's supposed to be. So I did. I stopped writing for a year. And then when I picked up again, I taught myself how to write picture books. When I got my MFA, I'd only worked on a middle grade. So I went back and said, okay, I'm going to learn to write this and write a picture book because they are joy and they are all about getting the words right. And so you can get lost in all the finessing of the words. And you can hold it all. A whole picture book can stay in your head at one time. Novels can't do that because they're so big, but you can hold a picture book in your head. And so you can have that joy with you all the time. You can go take a walk and it comes with you.
Love
and
that.
Yeah.
Well, how do you protect that joy now? So going through the experience that you had and then you refound the joy through picture books. So how do you protect that joy now? And what do you do on hard days? Because we all have them.
Yeah, we all do. We absolutely do. I have a hard and fast rule now. On the days I open my computer and I start typing and I say, this is awful. Oh my God. Like, are you a writer or what's going on? I just say, okay, that's it. And I close my laptop and I go take a walk. And walks are the great creators for me. And so if I'm out on my walk, maybe the walk might solve it for me. But if it doesn't, I'll start cleaning the house or do something else and run errands, do the stuff I need to do for everyday life. And hopefully the next day I come to my desk and it usually doesn't last more than one day. And then I open my laptop and I start again.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned ahead of our chat that no one has ever asked you about living, and you tell me if I pronounce it wrong, about living in the Lavaux region of Switzerland.
Yeah.
Or is it Lavaux or Lavaux?
No, it's, Lavaux. Yeah.
So my understanding is it's got vineyards terraced by monks in the 1100s. It's close to Lake Geneva. You've got the Alps right there. And so what does that landscape do for your writing? Because that just sounds amazing.
It is amazing and it's beautiful and calm and there's no pollution. And kids walk to school by themselves when they're in kindergarten. It's really quite amazing. And I think just having all that beauty around adds to this philosophy. If I'm not writing with joy, then I'm not writing at all. Because when you go out in that, there's just something cleansing about it.
Yeah. So I have to begin talking about your book, The Ugly Duckling, about the artwork from Calvin Nichols, because it stopped me in my tracks. So, we're going to obviously dive into Hans Christian Andersen's story, but can you just set the scene for listeners on what they experience when they hold this book? Because I've said this before, but what's so amazing about picture books is the art that they bring. And sometimes the art style can start to feel repetitive among some picture books. So I always love a picture book that just surprises me in the best possible way. And Calvin's artwork certainly sets the stage.
It does. It does. there was nothing out there like it. He calls himself a paper sculpture. And that's what it is. It's one thing to see it digitally online. It's another thing to hold it in your hands and you see the 3D, you see those hundreds of small pieces of paper that he put together. It took him 2 years to do it. And it's really so exceptional. And I need to correct myself. When you asked me what was the last thing that stopped me, and I think you're right. It was that, because it was very interesting. With other picture books, I've had little hints. I've seen sketches. I've maybe had a question from the illustrator along the way about this. That was like radio silence. I gave in my manuscript to Arthur Levine, nothing for 2 years, and then a completed picture book. Wow. Landed in my inbox. And that's when I was like, oh my goodness. And it's just, it's incredible. It's just incredible. It really is. He also gives these nods to Hans Christian Andersen. So for those readers who don't know already, Hans Christian Andersen used cutting out shapes as something to give him reassurance, to calm his world. It was one of his coping techniques for his neurodivergence. And even when he got up he not only wrote stories, he was invited to castles and mansions and big parties and asked to go in front of everybody and tell a story. But I think that was all just so nervous-making. He always had a scissors and some paper with him. And he would cut out these paper cuts as he told his stories. And there's this great quote by this young girl who watched him do it. And she was just incredulous because she was like, I think he enjoyed making that paper cut more than telling the story. Which I completely get as a creator because, of course, he had invented the story a long time ago. He'd created that a long time ago. He was performing the story then. But at that moment, he was creating. And what he was creating was a paper cutout. And Calvin gives a nod to the type of, so this is, the kind of paper cutouts that Calvin does. And Calvin, using his really great imagination, copied the kind of paper cutouts that Hans Christian Andersen did. And those are called folded cutouts. They're the kind we all knew how to make a snowflake. You take a piece of paper, you fold it a few times and you start cutting. And Hans Christian Andersen was a master at that. The Metropolitan Museum of Art has one of his, in its collection. And that nod to Andersen is also the secret cover under the book.
I love that. I know sometimes even though I know that there can be hidden gifts underneath those dust jackets, sometimes I forget to take them off. And with your book, I haven't held a physical copy in it. So I've only seen the digital. So I love that you shared that when we get that physical copy, we need to take off that dust cover. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that blue and white is just stunning.
Yeah. Well, the title, The True Ugly Duckling, does a lot of work. So what do you want readers to most understand about who Andersen really was beyond the fairy tale version of him that most of us carry around?
Yeah, I think for young readers, think about it. When you're a kid, you really have no idea what goes into becoming an adult. You look at these adults that they just seem perfect or imperfect, but you never really think about how they had a childhood and what they might have been like. And so the True Ugly Duckling, how Hans Christian Andersen became a swan, I want them to go, oh, just a second, wait, the Ugly Duckling story was his story? What does that mean? And then open the book and realize that, wow, He went through some tough things, but even though he did that, he came out as he found his way to becoming the Swan, his definition of a swan, which is, I think, so beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a moment in the book where the shoemaker's son sails into Copenhagen with a heart full of hope and expectation. So what was it like to write a child like Hans, so full of longing? And what did you know about that feeling personally?
Yeah. When I was getting my assessment for autism, the assessor said, what was the story you told yourself to explain why you were different than everybody else that you knew? And I think Hans was telling himself, I was born in the wrong place. I was born in this little village where everybody has small minds and nobody is open to what I'm doing here. So I'm going to get on a ship all by myself and I'm going to sail to Copenhagen. Like the greatest city in the world for him is the king was there. And so he sails in this, and Calvin, the piece of artwork that Calvin created for that I think it's my favorite. It's just stunning. And it is, he's filled with this hope and expectation. And then we turn the page and we see that the story he had been telling himself, that it was where he was, if he just changed that, life would all be rosy. We start learning that that's not the case at all.
Your little one grew 3 inches overnight. Adorable. Also, expensive. Sell their pint-sized pieces on Depop and list them in minutes with no selling fees. Because somewhere, a dad refuses to pay full price for the clothes his kids will outgrow tomorrow. And he's ready to buy your son's entire wardrobe right now. Consider your future growth spurt budget secured. Start selling on Depop, where taste recognizes taste. Payment processing fees and boosting fees still apply. See website for details.
2 teams, 1 cup. The primetime stage is set for the TGL presented by SoFi Finals, Los Angeles Golf Club versus Tigers Jupiter Lynx. Keep up, it's playoffs. Tune in Monday, March 23rd, 9 p.m. Eastern on ESPN2, and Tuesday, March 24th, 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN and on the ESPN app.
In your author's note, you write about 3 generations of neurodivergent women in your family, and that discovering you and your daughter are both autistic happened around the same time that you discovered that Andersen was likely on the spectrum too. So can you talk about that moment of recognition and maybe what shifted for you around then?
Yeah. Well, so my daughter went off to Yale, and people can think a lot of things about Yale. My greatest thing about her being there was Yale Health, and that they discovered that she was autistic because, wow, what a life changer. And then when she discovered that, she said, and yeah, you, Mom. And so I started reading, like everything that I could find. And it was during that reading that I discovered that Hans Christian Andersen's, well, first that experts who've read, because he's written so much, there's so many writings of other people who had met him saying their impressions. And experts have looked at all of that and said, yeah, we think he was on the autism spectrum. And when I read that, soon after that, I read that he said The Ugly Duckling was his story. And it was really like, again, one of those heart-stopping moments where you're like, of course, because isn't The Ugly Duckling the story of every neurodivergent child who wants to be accepted? And as soon as I had that thought, I just knew I had to write this story. It was like I felt obligated to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've heard that girls mask more extensively than boys, and that you did feel different as a child, but you didn't know why. So what did writing this book allow you to process or say that you couldn't have said before?
That is such a great question. What happened when I started reading Andersen was that I realized, wow, okay, yeah, he was neurodivergent, but he didn't mask like I was masking. And I realized that I had been, a lot of the books I've written so far have been biographies because I write biographies, and I have one about Vera Rubin, and I have one about Nacho, who created nachos. And I'd always thought of these books as their stories, their books. They weren't really mine. And when I started reading Andersen, I was like, wow, okay, I'm still, even though I've discovered writing and this, changed my career from being a lawyer to doing this, and there's all this fulfillment, I'm still masking. And I was like, okay. And at the same time I wrote The True Ugly Duckling, I was also writing a story called Seven. They both were born in the same months. Both of them I worked on as I was there at Yale with my daughter, and we were sorting things out and learning things. And I realized that, okay, I have an obligation, no matter how scary this is, for me to start walking out into the world right now and say, do you know what? I'm autistic. Because in our world, we have all kinds of, ideas about what autism is. I said, I want to do this. I want to do this. And I want to write stories where a pigeon is different, and where to say, hey, look, this great writer, the father of the modern fairy tale, he was also neurodivergent. And you know what? Everything worked out for him.
Yeah. And I think when I read these beautiful picture book biographies, and I just feel like they get better and better all the time. And I do think it's when the writer has this personal connection to the story, whatever that inroad is for them into that story. But I always discover when I've really loved a picture book biography, how closely connected the writer actually was to that personal story.
Yeah. And it makes so much sense, because then the story is much more their story too.
Yeah. Well, there's a line in the book about how Andersen used the reassuring, repetitive moment of cutting out shapes to soothe himself. And we talked about this before. Calvin's art mirrors that exact practice. So how intentional was that? Or I guess maybe the more important question, whose idea was that, using that art form for this book to echo what you were telling in the story?
Yeah. Well, when we sent the manuscript to Arthur Levine, and he very, very generously, Sandra, who do you have in mind to illustrate this? And I was kind of taken aback, because, you always hear, it's the editor's joy to choose who's going to be the illustrator. And I said, well, gee, I hadn't been prepared. I'm not prepared, because I thought, it's your decision. But I said, wouldn't it be great to have someone who did paper cutting? Because Andersen did paper cutting. But the genius was that Arthur already knew Calvin, because Calvin had done, I believe, a book cover for him like a long time ago, maybe when he was at Scholastic. And so I think for Arthur right away, he knew. He's like, Calvin.
Yeah.
Because we came back with different paper cutters for him, but I don't think I don't even know if he read what we said, because I think he'd already known that he wanted to ask him.
He knew, because Arthur Levine makes fabulous books, so he knew. He just knew.
Yeah, he did. He really did. Calvin and I just did a In Conversation for Publishers Weekly, and Calvin said when Arthur called him, he was like, what? Wait. What? Hans Christian Andersen paper cutting like I did? And he said, I couldn't say no. He said it was going to be the biggest, scariest project he'd ever taken on. But he said, I just couldn't say no.
Yeah. Well, he nailed it.
Yeah, he did.
So Andersen wrote about characters often who were underrepresented or oppressed children, the poor, those who didn't conform. And you're essentially saying with this story that his neurodivergent wasn't a limitation. It was likely his source. So how would you want children to receive that idea?
Yeah, I'm really hoping that they can look at this, like kids especially who feel like they're different, and that they can feel connection to this, and they can start reading Andersen's stories and maybe with new insight, like the ones a little bit like we talked about before, like Thumbelina. Oh, wow. Wait, she's a little bit like me. And Even The Little Mermaid, yeah, she's a little bit like me. I mean, I think in a way, even the boy who saw the emperor's, no clothes, he was different too. He's the only one who saw. And so if they know this about Andersen, I'm hoping they feel that connection and they start finding the connection more and more as they read through his stories. Yeah.
Well, you made a deliberate choice to structure this biography as though it was almost a fairy tale rather than just a straight narrative. So walk us through that decision. What could a fairy tale structure do that a traditional biography structure couldn't?
Yeah. Well, when I first thought I wanted to write this story, I started thinking about how to do it. And I always think emotion is so important in picture books. And I was scared that if kids started reading a story about Andersen, they might feel distance. Oh, he's just this historic guy, or look at those old-fashioned clothes, or Hans, it's not a very modern name we run across so often. I was scared they might just kind of turn off. And but there's just this thing about fairy tales where they come from the heart and that they just kind of open things up and allow the yearning to come out, allow for that connection. There's also some, not nice things that happened in Andersen's life. And the other thing about tales, at the same time they're going to our heart, they also give us distance where, we're not talking about a kid at the desk next to us who gets, held down to the ground and, until he squirms away and that people are laughing at him. These, for that to happen a contemporary way, that could be really traumatic. But if it's a fairy tale, I mean, just think of all the crazy, traumatic stuff happens in fairy tale that kids don't even blink at, My dad left me in a forest by myself to die. I mean,
like Hansel and Gretel, and they get shoved in an oven.
And they just take it in stride. And that's the great thing about fairy tales, where kids can read them, even though these villains are in these stories, they can still connect to these stories in a deep way. You're yearning to be like everybody else. You're yearning for love. You're yearning to be accepted. And that's why I wrote it as Andersen wrote his stories.
Yeah. Well, I know you wrote this book for all children who feel different, not only autistic children, but many kids who need this book most won't have a label yet or a diagnosis yet, and they may never get one. They may just be walking around feeling like they're too much for everybody. So, how do you write toward a reader that you can't quite define? Or are you just not writing towards a specific reader and you're just writing the story that your heart wants to tell?
Well, no, I think I always have in my mind that I always have this kind of vision of children as I'm writing, as my reader out there. But as you say, you never know who it's going to resonate with. And so, I don't know, I guess it's both of those things. I have this vision of children, but then you just have to write from your heart. And then when you write for your heart, especially through a fairy tale, my hope is that it'll just go straight to the heart of the child who really needs this story.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a spread near the end with the text. Now that he had started, the shoemaker's son couldn't stop. And what does that moment represent to you, both for Andersen and maybe for the children reading it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just like I've at last found who I am and where I should be going. I mean, it's just this beautiful moment where he really is trying for so long to make stories. And he has so many doors just shut in his face in various different ways. And finally, I guess he had all the tools that he needed. And he was released and he was on his way, and he was on his way to becoming a swan. I mean, that was it. It's like the ugly duckling where he looks into the puddle. I mean, not the puddle, into the stream, and he sees his reflection and he goes, wait, I'm a swan.
If a parent or educator is listening right now and they have a child in their life who masks or feels like an outsider or doesn't understand why they're different, what do you most want to say to that adult about handing them this book?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think handing the True Ugly Duckling is like, read it with gentleness and love and encouragement and hope, you know? I mean, I grew up thinking there was no one like me. And that's a tough way to grow up if you're masking so much that you can't even see that there might be others like you. So if they can take this book and show them that, wow, like even maybe the things you're using to cope with can be your way. Isn't that great?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's my favorite part. When I think about most things in life, when we want something so badly for ourselves, and he did want to be a storyteller and we want it so bad for ourselves and the world keeps telling us no. I think so many people start listening to the outside instead of listening to their inner voice. And those of us that persevere and continue and don't give up listening to our inner voice, I feel like they eventually find a way. And it may not look exactly what you dreamed of or you imagined, but I do think that this book shows that when you persevere and you just continue following your true self, marching to the beat of your own drum, that you will eventually find a way, even if it doesn't look like what you imagined as a child.
Yeah. I mean, I think he imagined first that he'd be an actor, but he just kept, it's exactly what you said. It's so well said, Bianca. Like he just had this heart that knew the direction that he needed to go. And he just kept on reinterpreting what that direction was until he had last found it.
Yeah. And just how incredible that so far into the future, we still know his stories and our children know his stories and their children will know his stories. I mean, just incredible to know that where he came from and what a lasting legacy he actually created. And he would have had no idea that he was having such a lasting legacy, but he has. And that I think that's what makes it so, back to the fairy tale question, so fitting for a fairy tale, because that is, a fairy tale ending.
It is the fairy tale ending. One of the other things I just love so much about his story is that it was always the adults who were shutting the door on him. And even when he first wrote his fairy tales, the adults were still like, these are strange. But it was the kids who they loved them. And it was the children who also had big hearts, who allowed him to take that heart drive and continue with it. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if we've covered everything that you would want to talk about this gorgeous book, but if there's anything that I haven't asked you that you would love for us to know, this is your opportunity.
I think we've talked about everything. I will say, if I can just throw a little bit of something about 7 in there, just because in my mind, they're so linked since I wrote them at the same time. And there you have a story about a pigeon who uses his differentness, his love of smell, to become a hero. It's the same thing for Hans Christian Andersen. He used his love of story to become a hero. And I think that's one of the things I really want kids and teachers and parents to realize too, that, you can look at these neurodivergent children sometimes become very concentrated on these things they just love doing so much, and just to allow them grace to do it. Isn't it so great to have something that brings you joy? And who knows where that joy might take them.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, so 7, A Remarkable Pigeon, that picture book was inspired by what?
Well, that picture book was really inspired by my daughter's journey. And just because she just finds joy in so many things that I think people just walk by and don't even notice. And so there was Seven with this great sense of smell. And of course, he wasn't fitting into what the flock thought he should be doing because he was enjoying the beautiful smells of the world. But in the end, they needed him. He was their hero.
I love it. Well, it sounds like those two books belong together.
Well, they will always be linked for me because of their creation stories and how they were written at the same time.
Yeah. Well, Sandra, this conversation will definitely stay with me, and especially the idea that what made Hans Christian Andersen seem possibly strange is exactly what made him extraordinary. So thank you for writing a book that says that out loud for the children who need to hear it most. And just a big thank you for joining us on the Growing Readers podcast today.
It was such a joy being here, Bianca. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us on this quest for growing readers. If Sandra's story and Hans Christian Andersen's moved you the way it moved me, I hope you'll head straight to the show notes where you'll find links to order The True Ugly Duckling and 7, A Remarkable Pigeon, as well as a link to Sandra's website at sandranickel.com. Truly, these are books you are going to want on your shelves. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, it would mean the world to me if you took a moment to leave a review and share this episode with someone in your life, a parent, a teacher, a librarian, anyone who has a child who needs to hear that what makes them different might just be what makes them extraordinary. The Growing Readers podcast is a production of the Children's Book Review. For more extraordinary books like The True Ugly Duckling, How Hans Christian Andersen Became a Swan, I hope you'll visit us at thechildrensbookreview.com.